Great.
It's recording.
Thanks, everybody. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can I just get a quick thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat if you're seeing just my presentation window? Excellent, thank you. Excellent, and you're not seeing the random chat, which is good because I'm trying to keep a couple of screens open so I can see if there's any questions. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to Amir and Joe and everyone from PMI's Northeast Ohio chapter for welcoming me to speak today and for welcoming me back after part one. And thanks everyone here for joining me or joining me again after the December session. Today, we're going to continue talking about the alignment between project management and organizational change management, or OCM. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably, whether it's OCM, organizational change management, or change management. Just to be really clear, we're only talking about OCM in terms of people change. We're not talking about technical change management, like where you might have a change advisory board for server changes going through a cab or anything like that. Also, we're not talking about change control within a project. This is really just organizational change. Excuse me. For those of you who do have experiences or questions, please absolutely jump in throughout the discussion and contribute. Love to hear from you. You can jump in on the chat. Or if you need to get my attention, feel free to just interrupt on the mic. That is okay. So today we're going to cover part two, getting it done, and I'll share more on the agenda in just a moment. Before we dive in, a little bit of a recap about me. I've been a project manager for about 30 years, and I started as a stage manager in theater, which is definitely a form of change management and project management. So if you're not familiar, I'm not going to go into all of it here today, but definitely feel free to talk to me anytime about it if you're interested, or you can watch part one. I go into it a little bit more there just to show some of that consistency. But that definitely is project management. It's where I got my start. And since then, most of my project management has been within the technology space, within IT. Change management came a lot later, and I hated it at first. And somewhere right around the 3-month mark, I had this epiphany that made my life a lot easier. And that was that project management and change management go hand in hand. So whether you're taking on both roles or wearing sort of one of those hats and partnering, there's a lot of ways for these two disciplines to fit together. And I wanted to talk about that today, about that alignment. I currently work at Progressive Insurance. I've been there just over 10 months, and I'm an IT manager I focus on OCM. I use a lot of what I'm sharing today and what I shared in part one in December in that role, but this is not Progressive content. So I want to be really clear. This is Julia content. It's not tied to the organization. I do have my PMP, which is the project management credential that you're all very familiar with, and my CCMP, which is the change management credential, that's the equivalent. I'm also certified in ProSci's change management methodology, ADCAR, which you may know of. I know that there are some Northeast Ohio PMI chapter events somewhere out, probably also on YouTube or on the site, that involve some ADCAR background. So we'll reference it a little bit, but this isn't going to be about that specifically. Today, we're going to start with a recap, mostly because there were several holidays between the last session and today. I don't know about you. I don't really remember anything anymore that happened in December. So we're going to start with a recap and talk a little bit, again, about some organizational models and process groups for both project management and change management. We're also then going to dive into getting it done, where we will recap a little bit of the getting started activities that got us here. And then we'll also talk about planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling, and then we'll bring it all to a close. So we're going to dive in. Any questions before we get started? I don't see any in the chat. Okay. Oops, that's not working. There we go. I have to get my own views working appropriately so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. That's not going to work at all. 1 second. There we go. Okay. There we go. So here we are. I know for those of you who are here in December, this may look familiar to you. This is really just showing very high level the differentiation between project and change management. Project management is using specific knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to deliver a thing of value. And I'm going to blink in and out of existence with my camera again. Sorry, my background is for some reason really trying to eat my hands here. But with project management, you're delivering a thing of value. And with change management, you're going to use skills, knowledge, tools, techniques to deliver and sustain that thing of value. So those two things work together. Change management is about that sustained change in behavior. Oops, ooh, and I'm going to jump way ahead for reasons beyond understanding. Because when there's a camera on, there's going to be technical issues. There we are. Okay. So the key difference here is that some of these objectives and priorities are going to be really different for these two roles. So whether you're wearing one hat or both hats, you may have some conflicting objectives. So that's really what we want to talk about, is how to get those two pieces to work together in a way that's a smooth transition for you. So I think we discussed this graphic as well last time, and this is a view from ADCAR or from ProSci of that's tied to their model. And you can see everything, just for your reference, everything I use as a reference is linked at the bottom of the slide, and there's a slide at the end, and those should carry over into the PowerPoint without a problem. I'm sorry, into the PDF that you're going to get sent out afterwards. So I know we talked about this graphic a little bit. This is a view of the technical side of change, which is the top, and then the people side, which is what you're seeing on the bottom of the slide. And you can see that basically the top, that technical piece, is where the project manager lives, and the change manager lives with the people side to embrace and adopt and use the thing of value that was built. I know a lot of these things are recaps, so we're going to go through them pretty quick. We did look at a couple of models last time as well, and this one in particular is extrapolated from a ProSci model of how teams may align. And this one focuses specifically on how the two roles of project manager and change manager align. So you can see on the far left, this is if the project manager and change manager are one person, filling both roles with two sets of responsibilities. In the middle, we have a project manager leading, and then a change manager leading a change management work stream on sort of underneath this holistic project management approach. And that may be in partnership with, there may also be a technical lead, a QA lead, a finance lead, a marketing lead, whoever else, and all of them work consistently under a single project. And the project manager is in charge of the whole shebang. And then on the far right, we have the project manager and change manager coming from separate parts of the organization. When I list separate organizations on this slide, I'm talking about two different areas within the company, not necessarily like outsourced or anything like that. And in that scenario, they would collaborate as peers. So I mentioned that based on my research and past experience, the first and the third were the most common that I've seen. The first being one of the most challenging, because you're trying to fill two hats and two roles and accommodate everything. The third also being very challenging because there's a relationship of equals that you have to manage. And that can be really tough because you probably both have equivalent experience, equivalent expertise in your respective fields, but you're going to have very potentially conflicting priorities. I know last time we had some discussion around these relationships as well, so I wanted to add a little context. And if anyone, again, wants to jump in, please feel free to do so via the chat, or take yourself off mute and jump in. The first scenario on the far left is likely to be a small project. Ideally, it's a small project. It can also arise in the situation when the change management needs were not properly assessed early on. They either weren't a focus, or we just weren't aware for whatever reason that there was going to be a big people impact. Excuse me. And then the project manager really has to fill in and do some of that firefighting and damage control, where all of those people focused needs are identified down the line. So sometimes you may have an opportunity to request additional resources and say you need a change manager to support you, and that's great. But in order to make that determination and to create that business case to allow for additional resources to be requested, you kind of already have to have started evaluating the needs, formulating a strategy, some of those things we talked about last month. So you're already kind of wearing that change management hat by this point. So just bear that in mind. That's likely to be the first scenario where you end up wearing both hats, even if you can shift into one of the other scenarios on down the line. The middle scenario is often the case where the project is mostly technical. Again, my background's in IT, so I'm going to focus on it from a technical standpoint, but it could be a focus from marketing, finance, whoever is really leading the change effort, whether you're doing a rate change for your product line or you're rolling out a new set of products or services. Whoever's delivering that would be the ones sort of running it. So in this scenario, it might be a technology change. So it'd be a project manager. And then, excuse me, and ideally in this scenario, the change support was recognized early as a need. So some of those needs were assessed. You knew you had a people change. And some support was brought on to the team to help out with that process. This might also be exactly the reverse for projects that are stemming from HR. Maybe it's focused on an organizational redesign or something like that. And they require a small technical change, maybe in an HR system to accommodate that large scale people change. So it would be run by a change manager or an HR project manager, which are often the same thing where with different titles. But then they would still need to reach out to like a technology project manager or a scrum master or dev lead or somebody to help just accommodate with doing some sort of small technical task to accommodate that change in like an HR system in this scenario, get it tested and get that deployed out the door. The scenario on the right is really when both changes are big. This might be a large system implementation that also has a large impact to team structures and also has a large set of like training and communication needs. That's where you're going to have really both roles taking active leads and working together as equals. We talked a lot about sponsors last time. This scenario, particularly the one on the right, needs that alignment more than almost any other. To ensure that the team aligns with the leadership team for the project, being the sponsor, being whoever leads in the various parts of the organization, to ensure that everyone knows who the final decision maker is and how and when to escalate, because you are potentially going to be at odds. Your needs might be different. So you really want to make sure that escalation path is crystal clear. Excuse me. I will zip through the other two views just as a quick reminder, and then we'll recap process groups really quickly, and then we'll dive back into our project. So this view can be found in the PMI Learning Library, and I'm a big fan of it just because it's so clear with just a couple of bullets showing the distinct responsibilities and how they may overlap, particularly within OCM and the PMO. It also includes strategy. So if that's definitely a big impact on your current program or initiative, this can be very helpful as well. I'm just focusing on those bottom two circles today. And then the last model that we looked at, and again, going through this really quickly, this is a view from ACMP, which is the Association of Change Management Professionals. They don't have a lot of pretty pictures. There's very few visuals. There's only one visual in the entire book, actually. So this is a screenshot of some of the text blurbs about the alignment between change management and both strategic planning and project management. So it shows how it aligns just like the previous image. Really, again, the core of all of these models is not to tell you which model to use or how to structure your project team or anything like that. The focus is to help you arrive at the right model for your initiative by determining where you see potential overlap between project management and change management work. And I'm sorry, I have a hair like right here and it just keeps tickling me. So, okay. Any questions so far? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, I know this is a lot of recap. We got to dust off our brains after a long holiday week, couple of weeks. It's been 5 weeks since part one. There's a lot of time to forget things. So again, as you can see, another recap slide, but there's a lot of different ways that we talked about for project management and change management to interact. The basics come down to these three elements. Talk about it early when the governance is still being established. That's key. That's number one. Talk about it early. In December, our whole session in December was early. That was, if we discussed it at any point during that first conversation, that all was what we would classify as early in this case, because we were discussing options for how to work together before we even got to planning. Planning is today. We didn't even talk about planning yet. Today, one of the things we'll look at is the possible outcomes of some of those discussions that we had in December. Part two, item two, consider your needs. How big are the change elements versus building the solution? What's your organizational culture like? I know we talked a little bit about that. Is your organization comfortable with change, or are people really nervous? Are people likely to be on board, or are they likely to get frustrated, maybe outright panic or leave? These are things you need to be aware of. And then number three, part three, get firm agreement. And can't say this enough. Documentation is so important within project management and change management. Get firm agreement from absolutely everyone. This would include your sponsor, both change manager and the project manager, leadership on both teams, anyone who's critical in that core team, the leadership team for this project. Get it in writing. Make sure it's in your RACI, make sure that everyone's on board. And in a scenario where, for example, maybe you're wearing both hats, you're both the change manager and the project manager, you need to be sure that your leadership team is aware of the impact of that decision as well. It doesn't mean that you're going to, excuse me, that you need to like maybe get sign off or something, but they need to understand that you have two sets of priorities that you're going to be working on, two things that you want to work through that will be that will be potentially different priorities for you, so it might align to different objectives. So they need to be really clear. Everyone in your leadership team, your core team, needs to understand. Any questions on that? I'm either being crystal clear or everyone's just still thinking about the trivia, which may be, we'll see. So moving on. Here are the process groups that we talked about. So the PMBOK processes that you know at the top of the slide, and the change management process groups as defined by the ACMP standard at the bottom of the slide. And as a reminder, they're mostly aligned, they're a little bit differently. So I just want to recap that briefly. We talked last month about evaluation and formulating strategy on the change management side, which both align to initiation on the project management side. So that was really how it lumps together. Neither one is better than the other. It's just a matter of how it's split up and how granular you want to get. You can see plan and develop a plan align, and then further down, executing a plan within change management is actually aligning to both execute and monitor and control on the project management side. So it's a little bit of a reverse. Both sides are really good. Both sides handle it well. Both sides accommodate all of the detail. They just do it in a slightly different way. So it's a little different how we talk about it. And then close and complete. Excuse me, I tend to use the language close just because I started as a project manager for so long that even when I'm doing change management, I say close. It doesn't matter because at that point we're wrapping it up. That's the important part. That's the last part. A lot of ending activities, right? So that is pretty much it. I do have one more slide on this. Again, just to recap what it looks like with the ProSci and ADCAR processes. Again, because some of you are maybe very familiar with those, it's very common in a lot of organizations. So I just want to make sure that we address that. You can see how those align as well. Last month, we focused on this piece. This was the vision, which isn't even represented here. We talked about that a little bit, and then evaluation, formulating strategy, and those aligning to initiation. Excuse me. And again, I faded out the ProSci stuff. We're not going to talk about that in detail, but I just want it there for reference. Today, we're going to focus on this. So we've discussed that foundation, and now we're going to get things really started. Now that we're going to take those foundations and get the project done. And you can see that go live line that's already there actually breaks this up very conveniently into the two sections we're covering today, which will be getting it done, which is what constitutes the whole middle of the chart here, and then the bringing it to a close. Any questions before we dive in? This is actually going to start to get into the newer stuff. I promise. Okay. Excuse me. The most important thing, still drink apple juice when you're speaking. It helps. I've had sinus problems because I live in Cleveland, and still this isn't that much coughing by comparison. So here is our title slide. We're going to dive right in. If you'll recall, we have our vision. We're going to the moon. Yay, we're going to the moon. We talked about how a vision is often handed down to us in either the role of a project manager or a change manager. Either way, it typically comes maybe from a leadership team or from a demand management process or a work request process, a prioritization process. Those are all maybe interconnected elements that would come from some sort of enterprise level or division level planning. So determining whatever we'll do, that comes from there. It aligns with strategy and objectives, and then it gets assigned to a team. And as a change manager or a project manager, you're part of that team or you're building that team, and the vision is already sort of in place. It's handed to you. One thing I missed, I wanted to share, and I think I immediately emailed Joe after the next day when I realized this. I missed an opportunity in our first session. So we had our session on December 14th. I wanted to make it up for today. It is way less cool today. I'm sorry. But December 14th, 2022, the day of part 1, was the 50-year anniversary of the last time NASA astronauts said goodbye to the moon, the end of the Apollo 17 mission before everyone came home. I learned this because of my lack of focus apparently on this particular portion. I learned it on December 15th. So I'm sorry I was not able to share that at the time, but now I think that it is absolutely meant to be. The article is linked there if you want to read about it. Our trip, our awesome vision of going to the moon, is now in honor of this 50-year anniversary. And the article is actually really interesting. So now it's been 50 years and a month, 50 years and 5 weeks since the last time NASA left the moon. So a lot of recaps still. I know you're all gonna think I'm crazy and didn't create any new content, but I did. Also, because last time we started a couple minutes early and I talked till probably a couple minutes late, I've shortened a little bit of it. So hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end too, which should be very nice. Going back to the moon restarted on 11/16. Really? It did? That's exciting. Well, then we are totally usurping that project, and all of the timelines I'm sharing are wrong. And we're going to go with Michael's timeline, pretend our project started on 11/16. Thank you for sharing that. It's always good to know, because the moon, is still pretty awesome. We see it every day. We want to be part of that. So what did we talk about last time? In our getting started recap, we talked about evaluation. Excuse me, which aligns with initiation in the PMBOK process groups. There's more to initiation we'll talk about because we also talked about formulating strategy. In this section, we talked about the types of information we might need, types of questions we might need to ask in order to properly assess or evaluate the, excuse me, our initiative from both the project or technical side and the change side or the people side, and how some of these things already cross that barrier. So you can see, for example, stakeholders. Chances are, as a project manager, you've probably done a stakeholder list. That is also on this slide listed as a change activity, and it's both. In this scenario, there's definitely some overlap that can be removed if from that complexity if you're wearing both hats. So you don't need to create duplicate documentation. One stakeholder analysis can absolutely check both boxes if you're wearing the change and project hats at the same time. However, in this scenario, it's easy to forget to change hats. So as a project manager, You've collected everything you need to know about stakeholders, their roles and responsibilities, their contact information, their availability. You've added them to the distribution list so that they will get your status updates and newsletters. Awesome. Great. You have a project manager based stakeholder analysis. Check. You're done. But did you ask what information they're curious about? Or how they like to get updates? Do they like to read? Do they like to watch? Should you be writing a lengthy narrative email that tells a story? Or should you be creating video messages to get the point across? Do you know what they're confused about or what they're concerned about? Basically, have you put on your change management hat and incorporated that into the stakeholder analysis too? Did you really check both boxes? So this may be easier with two people filling the roles, but then there's more coordination. There's no right answer. It's really just that there are different aspects to consider when you're evaluating your initiative. Same thing with messaging. As a PM, you create a communication approach that includes status updates and milestone reviews and training reminders, and you've added a fun fact into every communication, and you've accounted for everything that you want stakeholders to know. But did you ask what the stakeholders want to know? Not what you need them to know, but what they want to know. So a lot of that comes down to evaluating in these early stages, these early questions. It's really important to look at every stage through both perspectives, whether you're partnering or whether you're taking on both perspectives yourself. Is there a question in the chat? Let me see here. Oh, the article, excellent. Yes, thank you for sharing the link. It's also in the slides. I appreciate that, Leo. So this is the article that shows the diagram that I had shared a couple of slides back that had the 3 circles on it from the PMI Learning Library. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So you have that at your disposal. So get back into my presentation. There we go. Then we talked about strategy. We talked about formulating strategy. This is the other piece, still aligning with PMBOK initiation. So in evaluation, we asked a lot of questions. We assessed the various things we need to know, and then we determined what we need to do to develop effective strategies. So for example, we probably need a sponsorship strategy of some sort and an engagement strategy of some sort based on the stakeholders we have, which include our sponsors. Sponsors are one type of stakeholder. We definitely want some communication. We want some readiness to be determined for the organization. All of those pieces are things, that we need to address and have strategies for. So what we talked about last month was really just a list of the types of strategies we may need. Again, lots of potential overlap. So now we're going to dive in a little bit. And so that we have something a little bit more concrete to talk about for our project of going to the moon, I created a few deliverables to work with. You'll see a few of them pop up throughout the presentation here and there. There's also a few templates that I have that after the end, after we close and after the video and all of that, because I'm going to need to dig them up a little bit on a different computer and send them over. I can share those as well if people want to hang on after, if there's time. And either way, I will send them over to Joe and they can get added to the list. So there will be some templates if you're interested. But for today, really, it's a little bit higher level deliverables for the purpose of the presentation. So we talked about the strategies we need. Now let's actually create them. What are the decisions we made? So for our stakeholder strategy, we decided we want a joint stakeholder list. Why? Because I said so. I decided, but this should have been a collaboration with the change manager and the project manager. In this case, that's me. So we decided, the royal we as the entire leadership team, we're going to have a joint stakeholder list. And we're also going to have some fairly robust sponsor coaching. We want to make sure that we check that box and have the sponsors really ready to go and understand what they need. For communication, we decided we're going to work with our internal marketing and communication team. We don't want to go outside. We want people who know our stakeholders, our team members. We want people who know us. And we also wanted to save a little money. So we're going to go on we're going to focus with internal marketing and communications. That's going to be our strategy. They're going to build it. This isn't a plan. So you might be thinking, but where's all the detail? That comes in the plan. This is the initial strategy of how we move forward. For training, we're going with an external vendor. We're going to the moon. We're a bunch of project managers. We probably need somebody to teach us how to, I don't know, fly a ship, build a ship. There's a lot of things going on. So we're going to go with a professional training organization, an external vendor that has access to cool things like a flight simulator. So we don't have to buy one or build one. So we can actually do this. We are also going to have a readiness survey. We decided, again, this is the we that's in my head. So all of us as a team have decided we will have a readiness survey, and we're going to bring in some of that feedback. Excuse me. And we will also have objectives that we're going to get approved through leadership that will be both for the project side and the people side. We want both sets of objectives. So these are the decisions we have made. Some of this will come back later, some of it more, some of it less. But I wanted to give us some working information to start with for today. So another recap slide here, and then we'll get into some more new stuff. We talked about deliverables, and this is still my favorite way to demonstrate that alignment between project management and change management at this stage, because this is actual artifacts that we're delivering. We talked about determining together with everyone impacted how change management and project management will be handled from the deliverable standpoint. And all of these deliverables, I know the question came up last time, these deliverables are in the order, I guess, in which I start them. Some of them take longer, but there's a certain building that happens into them. You need to have most of these questions answered at the top before you can get to the deliverables at the bottom. They are not concretely dependent on each other, though. So you may have a different approach. You may get answers in a different order. Totally fine. But this is, excuse me, what we sort of that core list and where we would make a lot of those decisions about, for example, do we have one charter? Do we have a change charter that is separate? Is it baked into the project charter, or do you actually want a separate change charter? I've seen both. I'm not a big fan of two charters. I think it gets confusing at that particular level. But again, for a large HR project, it was really critical. So we decided for the most part, again, this is the we being me presenting this, that we're going to have one version of each of these documents with all of the details for both sets of needs. We're going to accommodate it all. As we just shared, we're going to have one stakeholder list. We mentioned that on the previous strategy slide on that decision. One communication plan. We'll have one training plan, one set of objectives. It will have objectives for both, but it's documented in one place. People objectives and technology or project objectives will be documented together, we decided. Excuse me. So we'll be looking at each of these deliverables from both perspectives. And I'm not going to go through every single deliverable. Again, you guys are project managers, you know how to do this. But I want to pull out some of those key pieces of where that potential overlap is, right? So now let's meet our stakeholders. Ta-da! Here's our stakeholders. I used personas that I made up for these folks. You may recall from, again, way back in December that we talked a little bit about personas, very high level. A persona is a fictional person. It's an archetype created to represent a group of stakeholders that have similar needs or similar roles. Normally, they are created by reviewing data from that sample group or interviewing representatives of that group. I went a different way and just made them up using names of people I've worked with in the past. So all of these names and roles I pulled as closely as possible to the role that they actually were on a project team. They were not all from the same company. And I went and found some cool open source headshots. But we're going to pretend they're real for today. So this is, again, fairly high level. It's also an incomplete list. There's only 10 stakeholders here. We would obviously have a lot more than that. If you are, however, working in personas, you may not have more than 10, and that's okay. Bigger projects may have like 5 to 10, excuse me, but when you get into large, complex, like sort of multi-phase, multi-area initiatives, you may have 20, 30 personas, and it's not unheard of, but they would be get more and more focused, and maybe not each person is working with all of them. So we want to just, again, go back to how our stakeholder list here, this group of people, reflects also those strategic decisions that we just shared a couple slides ago. So for example, Kendra is new. She hasn't been a sponsor before. So we're going to set up a sponsor plan for her, including a lot of coaching, setting her expectations, and whatever else she needs to succeed so that she can focus on her own key decisions, and focus on the program and what we're doing, while we, as the change manager, help her with the details of her role. So that's a big piece of it. We have one stakeholder list, which was one of our strategic decisions already, and a robust sponsor plan to support our sponsor. Daniel, in this scenario, he was part of the decisions, part of the discussions to keep communication in-house to save some money. He was also part of the decisions to spend more on external training, finding someone who has a flight simulator and other equipment that we need to get our teams ready. He was open to that, and he helped make those decisions of, do we spend here or there? He went along with the training plan. Nora and the team she represents have not necessarily been impacted by the strategic decisions yet, except that she is on the same consistent stakeholder list. However, she will have a lot of input in determining the overall plans as we move forward, including she's command and control. This will include the right launch window and the safe return schedule. She will absolutely be a recipient of all of the stakeholder communication and engagement. They all are. Everyone here is a stakeholder, so they'll all be part of it in some way, shape, or form. But her input and her influence are going to be more on the project side and the technical side going forward in the planning. Akira, our pilot, will have a lot of learning to do since this is a brand new spaceship. So the decision to go with an outside vendor who can handle training for this type of craft, even though we haven't even built it yet, will make Akira's life a lot easier. So he doesn't have to figure out how to train himself. So he is definitely impacted by that decision that we have to make sure that our teams are ready. The fact that we're having training at all was a decision. It seems like a silly decision not to, but it's a decision. And then we will definitely have these training experts come in to support him. Lisa at the far right of the top row, she and the team that she's supporting, they're supporting Akira. They're the rest of the flight crew, and so they're supporting Akira and his group. She needs just as much training and support as the pilot team, but she will also get less opportunity to fly, mainly because I'm going to say she doesn't have as awesome a jacket as Akira does in his picture, because it's a pretty awesome jacket, which was like 90% of the reason I picked that picture. But maybe not everybody on Lisa's team even really wants to go. I know we talked about resistance last month. This may be one of the ways that resistance manifests. Team members who don't really want to be part of the team. This is info that maybe the PM stakeholder analysis does not care about, because their roles and responsibilities are documented. So on the project side, maybe it doesn't matter, but on the change side, you absolutely need to know. So if you are using a joint list, which we are, you may want to add columns for something like attitude or commitment, which are really critical for change managers to know. Resistance likely won't align to a specific persona like this. Obviously, this is all illustrative, although you can create a resistor persona to help you focus those activities. Knowing the different types of resistors, you can create groups for them so you can approach those challenges as you go. Moving into the next row, we have Monica. Monica's team is handling building the new ship, getting it supplied, and she will be also more impacted by the project-focused decisions that we talked about in part 1, like how long we'll be on the moon, how many people are going, what we need to bring back, things like that. She is, in fact, also going to be very, very tied to the training approach. So the fact that we have an external training vendor is going to be really impactful for her, because she and the training team need to align on how the ship is going to work. She's building it, the training team is training on it. The ship isn't done when we're training, so we need to make sure that what's being built and what's being trained are exactly aligned. Since our training team is going to be external, which we talked about a couple slides ago, that was our decision. That might be a lot more challenging if Monica runs into something that means that she will have to, for example, change the design. That has to ripple through training and has to get there to the right people so that there's no impact to the final flight, right? So then we have next to her, we have Amir, who's doing a lot of experiments. He's leading the science teams. He's going to be doing a lot of work while in space and on the moon. And he represents a team that will absolutely need their questions answered in great detail and to their satisfaction. We're talking about a science team. Things have to be really precise here. So the strategic decision to use in-house communication helps here because that team has worked with Amir before. They can anticipate his questions. They know how the science group likes to get their information. They know the level of detail to reach. So that's going to be really helpful and might help smooth the process as we go forward. Charles is from outside the company. If we didn't decide to go with an external vendor, he wouldn't be here. It's definitely an impact, a big strategic impact to his company. Also, staying outside means that he can focus on training and not worry about things like performance evaluations or other reviews. His objectives are laser focused on getting everybody ready for a safe trip. That is all he cares about. He does not need to care about the rest. So that decision helps keep training really separate and not embroiled in any other political anything that might exist within the organization. Lynn, in this case, represents a large marketing and communication team, and she pushed for the decision to keep communications in-house. She talked about it from a cost savings perspective, and also from the perspective of aligning with the other teams that are on the project. As we mentioned, her group already knows how to communicate with Amir and his teams, the level of detail, the formats they like, the reports they like, all of that. So that was really helpful. She also talked a lot about about keeping a smooth alignment with other communication initiatives throughout the organization. This is not the only thing that's happening. It's very rare that there's one project in an organization. So we want to make sure that everybody is as ready as possible there as well. And the last profile we have is Greg, and he represents everybody else in the company, everyone who isn't part of this initiative. The strategy to send out a readiness survey absolutely impacts Greg a lot. That's the place where he and everyone he represents get to share their thoughts, their excitement, their disappointment at not being chosen, their relief at not being chosen, their fear, their concerns, everything. This group is also impacted by the strategy about which feedback to respond to and which to skip. Those who aren't part of the initiative are still stakeholders from a change perspective. They need to be reflected in change management activities, especially if there's a strong emotional or a perceived reward with being on a project or a perceived punishment with being on a project. The people who aren't on the project are your stakeholders, which is a key difference with project management. Project management doesn't really care about people who aren't impacted. And it shouldn't, because if you're not impacting that team, you're not impacting that team. But like there's no need to take that action. From a change management perspective, especially if there's some sort of like emotional charge around the program that you're talking about, change management does need to consider the stakeholders who are not stakeholders who aren't impacted at all. Behind this list, we will absolutely see lots of training, or I'm sorry, we'll see all sorts of other details and contact information, things like that. PMs will have their availability, boundaries of roles and responsibilities, and change management may include, as we said, communication preferences, whether they're enthusiastic supporters of the program or whether they're a little bit more grudging. Since we talked about it in December, I just want to make sure that we're talking about, there's a couple of reasons why people resist. The bulk of them being that they don't understand yet. So they haven't bought in because you haven't done a good enough job of explaining why you're doing whatever it is you're doing, or they're worried that you missed something. This one, we're also talking about that third example, which is they want to be a part of it and aren't, or they don't want to be a part of it and they are. Either way, it leads to some resistance. So these are things that you do need to address. And there's a question, would you also have something like an in-house training liaison? Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not a comprehensive list. I would recommend anytime you're working with a vendor, you would absolutely want a call, somebody from internally, from inside the company who's helping to drive and coordinate and work with that training team. Yep, that's a great call. One other sideline that just occurred to me. So a couple of years ago, I wrote an article called "No One Cares About Your Change, and There's Nothing You Can Do to Make Them." And that sounds really, really terrible from a change perspective. But basically, it's about how changes at a corporate level can be two things. They can be absolutely the right thing for a company to do, and absolutely the wrong thing for some of the employees. Both things can be true. It's totally normal. It's okay. You have to address it, but that doesn't mean you have to fix it. There's not going to be a big piece of like a perfect victory, I guess. There won't be that with a lot of big changes. Someone's going to be against it, and that's okay. Um, if you're interested, I can share the link to the article after as well, so that can go out in the follow-up email. It's a short read. There's a lot of cute pictures of a dog named Denver. He's pretty awesome. Um, Definitely worth a couple minutes. And one of the things I just wanted to, as we come back to our stakeholder list here, and this is again at a high level persona level, this might represent hundreds or thousands of people. This list ties in, this deliverable ties in with the strategies that we talked about, and will tie in with the plans that we're going to talk about. It's all very interconnected. Any questions? I see something else in the chat. In my opinion, that's best to have, I'm assuming, yeah, the training liaison, but often the change management lead is the training liaison, and to external vendors, etc. Yes, often the case. Change management leads are very often the liaison to training and communications, whether they're internal or external. I would argue that a change manager, that's a good fit. The lead may or may not be a good fit, because depending on the size of the project, hopefully you have a couple of change managers, just like you may have a project management team. Of course, the answer is always it depends. But I would recommend having it be somebody who's not also sort of like running the whole change initiative. But again, if it's a smaller project, just like a project manager is often the liaison with all of the various other groups, a change manager often is as well. For a massive initiative, and I know we're talking about something like fictitious here, but if we were actually going to the moon, that's going to be huge. It's going to have more than 10 stakeholders. It will have thousands and thousands of stakeholders, and thousands of, hundreds of people, probably thousands, I have no idea, of people building and supplying and planning and doing math and all of this. There's a ton of work behind there. So one change manager who's leading the change management initiative probably is also going to have a team of change managers, some of whom should absolutely be liaisons to training, to communications, to readiness groups, culture organizations throughout the company, whatever that looks like, just to have that support, because otherwise there's just too much for one person. At least that's as companies have tried to do one person change, and having been the recipient of that, it is definitely too much. I can speak to that from experience. You need to beg, borrow, steal a lot of resources and some support. So any other questions or insights? Okay, let's move on. So we're going to now talk about the next phases. Again, some we'll dive into more than others. Just like in part one, where I split initiate from the PMBOK side into the change management process groups of evaluate and formulate strategy, here I'm following the project management side and splitting execute and monitor and control. Again, just to recap, I'm not recommending that we massively change terms you use. I'm not creating a brand new methodology. This is really just to show how those kind of pieces fit together. And I like icons. The Noun project is awesome. There's links at the end of referencing this. It's free. You can download all kinds of cool stuff. which is why I attribute it at the end, because it is a free resource, but I want everyone to get their um, respect for what they've done. And I am not an artist who made any of these. Let's start planning. There are lots of different types of plans and methodologies, whether you're working with a project management tool or a delivery tool or a spreadsheet or Post-its on a wall or a notepad. It doesn't matter. You need to plan for managing your project. You're all PMs. We're all PMs. You know this. Change management is no different. So again, we can follow whatever decisions we made early in the program. So we made some decisions in December. I shared some that we rolled up and we assessed for today as a starting point. And, excuse me. So one of those decisions was that we're going to have one plan or one document for each of the deliverables, and it'll accommodate both things. But I want to talk a little bit about comparison. What is better? Joint plans or separate plans? Let's look at some of the awesome reasons for either of or each of those. Joint plans can be really great because there's only one document to maintain, to share with sponsors, team members. There's a single point of truth, a single point of reference, which is always a good thing. Very little confusion when there's only one document to look at, right? However, separate plans allow clear ownership, accountability. With separate plans, you don't get that game of like ownership hot potato, where if everyone owns a document, then no one really owns it. Oh, there's 5 owners. 5 people will respond to this. We're supposed to respond to this email. Who does? Nobody. I thought someone else was going to do it, right? We've all seen that at some point. Accountability is definitely easier to track when there's a single owner of each key document. Separate plans mean much less risk of overwrites or version control issues, no matter how good your document management system is. And we're going to face it, they're usually not that great. With a single document, there is always a chance of overwriting somebody else's work, always, or canceling out their updates or something, or leaving it checked out and locked so nobody else can get to it. With individual ownership of separate documents, that risk is significantly reduced. But on the other side, joint plans make it easy to see the holistic overall big picture, right? You can see everything that's happening in one place. The overall status is all in one place, easy to review. That it depends, somebody posted in the chat, that's coming. I know you're going to be shocked. Also, joint plans are really great because they're consistent. It's really easy to read a plan when you know exactly what to expect. The date formats are the same, everything's in the same columns, they're all in the same order because everything is in one plan. You don't have to worry about saying, oh, where did this person put this? Where did that person put that? It's all in one place, super easy to read. But separate plans are way more customizable. You can focus on whatever detail you need. The scope of each separate document can be like laser focused, so you don't have to scroll through a whole bunch of detail that might be irrelevant to what you're looking for. We are absolutely back to balanced. I know you're shocked. You're so shocked. There are lots of other pros and cons for both, really, and ultimately it is up to you. My favorite is actually a hybrid. I use a joint roll-up document, typically at a high level and individual detailed plans that roll up into it, whether it's programmatically rolled up or manually, either way. But I like to have those specific separate documents that allow detailed plans to get all the nitty-gritty details that we all need to do our jobs and keep things moving. But that way it doesn't interfere with the overall big picture and it doesn't get confusing. I'm gonna take a look in the chat. What have we got? Working on a large project with teams on 2 separate continents. We're using one playbook in Smartsheets with the RACI built in. Yep, absolutely. And everyone will work, communicate, and collaborate in the same document. Love it. I used to hate Smartsheets. I hated Smartsheets until like my last job, and then I learned more about Smartsheets. So I was a resistor until I understood it, just like many resistors I'm sure you've seen. So now I'm a fan. There are tools I might prefer, but I understand the power of the interconnectivity of Smartsheets. 2 plans seems like there's potential for he said, she said. Yes, especially if they're in a document form, if there's no alignment between the project manager and change manager. Yes, absolutely. Thank you and bye for those who had to drop off. Yep, absolutely. I'm assuming, Diana, if you're talking about Smartsheets, I bought in. I am a believer now. Again, there are definitely tools I like some more, but Smartsheets, it works. And it's I don't know, I think it's cheaper also than some of the others, which is nice. Still run a lot of projects on Excel, never know what tools are available due to budget. Absolutely. I can say I'm not by any means at this point like a tool expert in all of the available bazillions of resources out there. But there's a lot of open source project and change management tools as well. So lots of options. And if anyone wants to respond to Patricia, anyone else use monday.com? I have not. But I'm going to dive back in and thank you for the conversation, and please keep that going in the chat as well. So we are going to move into an example. For our purposes, I'm actually not using any of the things we mentioned. I'm just going to use PowerPoint for a rolled up plan, mainly because it's really easy to read and we're already in PowerPoint. Again, as I mentioned at the very end, like after the video and after the presentation, I can hang on and share some templates. It's just going to take me a minute to like get them to the right computer to be able to do that while Joe and Amir are wrapping things up. So I'm happy to share those templates. We'll send them out. They're available to you. But I want to make sure that our focus is really on that comparison between change management and project management for the presentation part. So we'll dive into that. Okay. Here is our plan. Yay, sample roll-up plan. You will see there's very little detail of how anything is getting done, just that it is. Also, this doesn't require any particular methodology or framework. I'm a big fan of high-level visual roll-ups. There are a lot of tools that do this. I know, I think Jira has a portfolio insert. I feel like ADO has one at this point. A lot of places where you can kind of pull something like this programmatically to the top, to the forefront. Again, PowerPoint, it's more manual, but for our purposes, because this is all fictional, was pretty easy as well. I like a good high-level roll-up because it doesn't require any specific methodology. Each section of time or each group of activities, each work stream can be worked either iteratively following some sort of agile approach like a Scrum or a Kanban, or it can be worked in a waterfall plan in a tool like a Microsoft Project or Smartsheets or whatever else you have out there. These blocks can also then lead to different detailed plans that are run by a project manager or a change manager. And they can also even be run by one of the stakeholders that we talked about a few minutes ago. So for example, Monica may own that first section of building and supplying the spaceship. Nora may own planning. She's going to represent command and control. They determine things like launch windows. So all of that she would be involved with, but maybe selecting the experience, this experiments might also include Amir. So they might co-own that plan, but now you have two owners. So they may also need a little bit of ownership support from a project manager at that point. Maybe Charles owns the training plan. And as someone mentioned in the comments or in the chats, absolutely, he would work with an internal, some sort of liaison, whether it's probably the change manager or somebody on that team. So have some sort of oversight, whatever was agreed to early on, because our vendors need to be part of that agreement as well, definitely included in the contracts. Maybe Lynn also owns the communication piece. I say may for all of these because it's all up to the governance decisions that were made at the beginning. Instead, maybe you just have the project manager and the change manager own all the plans and they just work with the stakeholders as needed to keep them accurate. All of this is fine. None of this is rocket science. It doesn't matter. And I just realized I said that. So this is rocket science, but our portion is not rocket science. This isn't anything new. This is not anything new to most of you. But I want to be sure we look at it holistically, right? So that you know how each portion of the project plan can impact others, how everything is interconnected. As PMs, we are all used to that. It's part of our job to identify, track interdependencies, work to solve any issues, right, that may come up. It is important, though, to clarify one really important thing. Adding change management as a piece is not just adding just one more thing. That's not what it is. It has one more thing for each change or category of tasks or chunk of time. So your change management really does kind of blow it out to double. For example, you're adding communication and training and engagement to the portion of the project that's building a spaceship. You're adding communication and training and engagement to the portion of the project that is planning and preparing command and control, prepping the experiments. You're even adding them to the training and communication areas. And I have an example that I want to share. So if, for example, we look at training, so this is just the training portion, right? Just the training work stream. You will absolutely still need to communicate about the training. When is it? Where? What are you expected to learn or do differently? There needs to be communication about that. You need to inform or train about the training, which sounds weird, but this might include how to log into a training system, how to drive, like what are the driving directions to the simulator. There's still elements that need to be updated to a person. They need to know how to do the things that they need to do to train. And they'll still need engagement. Particularly, this might be training around engagement might start with an assessment of current skills to identify gaps. So a learning or needs assessment you've probably heard of, that's actually an engagement activity around training is really what that kind of comes down to. In order to know what success criteria looks like, what do I need to know to feel like what score do I need to pass to say I'm ready? That's part of that engagement piece with training. This sounds a lot like a full OCM effort on the training portion of a massive initiative. It's all interlinked, which is why it's really great that we worked everything out at the beginning and know exactly how our project manager and our change manager will work together. Because when time crunches and other stressors happen, the best option is to have a signed off document to look at, right? And I see some chat about Jira and Confluence. I'm a big fan also. There's Monday.com tutorials, good information in the chat. Please keep that coming. So let's look at our plan again. There will often be a line, and this is a little bit of a carryover, but that's okay. There will often be a line like what you see for communication. It basically says, we'll communicate. It's beginning to end. In this case, it spans what, 2.5 years. There will also likely be a comprehensive communication strategy behind that outlines your audiences and your high-level purpose and approvers and which communications can be just in time and which should go through those like communication sweet spots, which for those who don't know, it's mid-morning. There's about an hour and a half mid-morning, an hour and a half or so mid-afternoon, Tuesday through Thursday. If you want a communication that's not tied to a direct call to action, but you just want somebody to read things like a newsletter, leadership announcements, those are your windows. You'll just get the best read rates. There's probably also a good plan behind that one line of communication. That plan shows maybe, for example, your weekly status reports are on it, monthly newsletters, quarterly leadership messages, a clearly defined approach for your ad hoc messaging. It still, however, is not going to have any details on what is being communicated. I'm a big fan of this. No matter how your project is operating, communication is iterative. Communication is always iterative. And the reason I say that, and I'll go into it a little bit more, is because it always has to be responsive. So when you're looking at communication from a change perspective, it has to happen responsively. You will know that you're sending out a newsletter, but the content happens iteratively. As a reminder, project communication, so wearing your project management hat, communication is what you think or what you need your stakeholders to know. Statuses, risks, escalations, deployments, things that are really critical for the project, but they come from the project. Communication from a change perspective is what they think they need to know, or what they think they want to know, what they want to know. What's in it for me? Why me or why not me? Why am I on this? Why am I not on this? How is it impacting my life? Will my job change? Will my job still exist? This kind of comes down to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're familiar, it's the big pyramid that has like your basic survival needs at the bottom, that are that are critical, like safety, and then it goes on to like food, shelter, and then fulfillment as you go up. First, people need to know, to feel safe in the case of projects, will I still have a job? Will I get enough support learning how to do it in a new way? What happens if I take too long to learn? These things need to be answered before they're listening to anything else you say. If people are worried about their future, they don't care about the rest. They just don't. And that's, so you're looking at it from a perspective of looking at it from the perspective of the stakeholder. You have to address those needs first. These are not things you can fully plan for. You can preemptively, you can assume, you can brainstorm, you can research, you can survey, and you can be as ready as possible, but you cannot predict every question. So be prepared as you can be. And then think of communication again, not as reacting all the time, but think of it as responsive and iterative. What questions are we getting this week that we should address in this week's communication? So we have maybe a 1 week cycle on some sort of messaging. What rumors have we heard this month? If we have a monthly leadership message, a monthly newsletter, what rumors have we heard this month? Particularly what rumors that are completely wrong. So let's put the truth out there so that we can fix it and address those rumors. Note on rumors: in the absence of facts, people will fill with their own facts and share them, and they will share them faster than you share facts. And it will usually be the worst case scenario that they assume. 100% human nature. This is totally normal. Think about it. If you have a headache a little too long, stomach ache a little too long, you finally decide, you call a doctor, the doctor recommends you come in so they can take a look at you. They haven't said they're worried. They're like, oh, they might just be appeasing you, in fact. But suddenly you're looking up symptoms of brain tumors or ulcers or a heart attack if you have some chest pain, and suddenly you're having chest pain, even though you didn't before, but now you're panicking. It doesn't matter if the test shows that maybe you were fighting a little infection, or and you need an antibiotic. Maybe you grind your teeth and you need like a $12 mouth guard, and that will solve your headache problem. Maybe you need a good antacid, a better antacid. I'm 45 now. Just like things change as you get later in life. You cannot eat what you used to eat. So you're getting some more heartburn than you did. Okay, doesn't matter. You're still potentially worried for weeks about that headache. That headache is going to be a tumor. Oh my God, every time. That slight itching, pain, heartburn is really a heart attack. Oh my God, this is how people operate. Not everyone does this over health. Some people do it over engine noise, a rattle in your car. Suddenly your car is going to explode. You can't take it on the freeway, get off the road. Some people do it over a football draft maybe you're not happy with, because whatever is happening, it's going to ruin the entire season. That's it. I can't watch. It's over. Football is over for me. Why? Because of one draft that didn't go the way you wanted. Is the season ruined? Probably not. Maybe for you. Maybe you're happy. Maybe you're not. Sometimes the worst really does happen. Sometimes your project really does reduce jobs. Sometimes the most excited person does not get to go to the moon. All of these things are still on your plate as a change manager. You still have to address them. You're on the hook for those communications and all of that, but with the help of legal and HR, if like jobs are getting impacted, you're not doing it alone. But before those rumors get out there and suddenly you're now trying to fight and communicate about things that aren't going to happen, which seems like a really weird waste of everyone's time, you have to respond to those quickly, right? And the way to do that is iteratively. The reason I bring this up is that all of these things that are potentially really great or potentially really difficult can happen at any phase or work stream within a project, which is why communication is iterative, which is why change management applies to every single piece of the project. It's not just at a work stream. change management can happen every step of the way. We talked about a lot. We talked about rumors. We talked about stressors. We talked about iterative communication. I ramble a lot. Any questions? I'm going to take a look through the chat and see, excuse me, before we get back into our roll-up plan. Especially for a project like this, communications workstream plan may have both internal and external communications. Absolutely, yes. And all of those elements will be in there. Yes, iterative. I'm always a big fan of anything change happens iteratively, even if you're doing a waterfall project, because you don't know what people are going to ask the next day, right? That's how you measure. I love that it's based on continuous risk assessments. We don't dive too much into risk here, but yes, absolutely, that is a big factor. And a lot of that you hear through sort of the rumor mill, word on the street. What are people saying? Awesome. Okay, I'm not seeing any specific questions, but again, great conversation in the chat. So thank you for that. Now we're going to move into execution. I know it seems pretty obvious. It is. Get it done. This is the part where we follow those more expanded plans, the more expanded versions of the process groups, everything we've been discussing, and use what PMI uses. So we'll break out monitor and control. So for execute, follow the plans, get it done. This is the same for both project managers and change managers. If only all execution went as quickly as I think I have this, the animation for the check marks to be about 1.5 seconds. How awesome would it be if all execution went that quickly? You might have thought we were going to spend some time on execution, but really it's just follow the plans. Everything you agreed to at the beginning of the project. That's it. So we're going to move on to monitoring and controlling, where there is a little bit more meat than this. I'm also adding in another term that I really like from ACMP, from that standard, from the change side, and that is modifying. So we're going to monitor, control, and modify when necessary. And that happens in parallel with execution. So yes, all of these check marks, some of these may have been very smooth and some may have not been checked off so smoothly as they were on this slide. So we'll dive into what it looks like to monitor and control. Okay, here we see the cycle I mentioned. Monitoring, we know how to monitor. Regular touch points, we track against our plans. We make sure things are moving. Again, this is just basics of how to manage work, right? We keep an eye on it. We regularly check in. Control, that's when we actually track those required changes. We recommend some sort of action to address them. And then the one I've added in here is modify, which is updating the plan as needed, because there will be a ripple effect. This is kind of your change control process maybe, or something like that, and get the word out to everyone. Communicate so everyone knows what happened, right? During execution, this is continuously going, constant monitoring, controlling, and modifying. And that is happening in every area of the plan, both on the technical side and on the people side of every single activity and work stream. You're doing both. And you're not just doing both at the technical side and the people side. You're doing it everywhere. You can see how many potential areas of confusion there are, and they're all interconnected. So if you recall, we are not here to talk about specifically how to be a change manager or a project manager. We're here to talk about how to make those things work smoothly together without clashes, without confusion. This looks like a recipe for disaster. There's a lot of moving parts. They're all interconnected. And in this model, what I'm showing is an illustration of like 5 high-level work streams, and there's only 4 arrows. This is not a really interconnected model, right? There's so much more when you get into it. So monitoring is constant, right? Monitoring nonstop. But what most projects have, they don't have constant change in every work stream. You're always monitoring, but not everything always has to be controlled and not everything has to be modified. So there still needs to be a lot of coordination throughout. So how do you do this? Thank you. You jumped ahead into documenting lessons learned. Yes, absolutely. So how do we resolve this? We're not jumping into lessons learned quite yet, but thank you, Robin. We will. You've seen this before. but we're going to talk about it early. We're going to consider our needs and we're going to get firm agreement. This is how we coordinate everything. These three things. If you need anything to remember how to work together, this is it. We always need to have clear documentation and, more importantly, a clear understanding of how to go back to when things like something to how to go back to the basics when things get crazy, stressful, confusing, constant change. Things that we agreed to may change as well, right? So maybe there's new leadership, sponsor filling in after someone got promoted, new information that leads to new work that wasn't previously discussed that has even wider implications to our people teams that we even realized. These kinds of changes layer on top of a project. And as you know, processes, I mean, the processes don't change. You have a change control process that you assessed early, right? Or your company has one or whatever. So again, talk about it as soon as you can. Whatever the change is, new sponsor, talk about it. Talk to the new sponsor, talk to the leadership team. Consider the needs of your new situation, whatever that situation is, and get firm agreement on how you move forward from there. Any questions before we move into closing? And in closing, we will get to lessons learned. Although I love talking about it along the way, I'm a big fan of that. Though neither one of our processes that we're talking about today, project or change management, include lessons learned along the way. They all do it at the end. I like iterative, but however it works. Okay, let's dive into close. So for the rest of today, we're going to talk about closing. And we're going to look a little bit more detail in a little bit more detail of the process definitions. So according to a key article on project closing in the PMI Learning Library, that again is linked at the bottom, the activities required to close a project can be summarized as assure that the project work has been completed, assure that all agreed upon project management processes were executed, and then the formal recognition of the project of the completion of the project, right? On the ACMP side, the activities are complete the change management effort, design and conduct lessons learned, and this is where your lessons learned are. Design and conduct lessons learned evaluation, provide the results to establish internal best practices. It's very long. And then gain approval for completion, transfer of ownership, and then release of resources, right? These all get wordy. They're all channeling me, sorry. So you can see they're all sort of aligned. On the left, they align pretty well. Pretty much the work is done, right? In the middle, that middle section, the project management activity basically makes sure you did your job, the PM agreed upon processes, which may or may not include lessons learned. Some technology projects don't actually need that, right? But it's from a change side, you always need it. So it's not necessarily in the scope of the technical project, but it is in the flavor text as you read into, we know it's part of closing, it's just not part of the way this particular article defined it. The change management side is much more specific around lessons learned. I think their wording might even be a little too specific because that gets really long. But one thing I noted was that when talking about lessons learned, the ACMP standard specifies, and this is a direct quote, this step is conducted by the change management lead in concert with the project manager when possible. If that is not a call for alignment and collaboration, I don't know what is. This is, I'm assuming you all know, and based on the chat I'm seeing, definitely have some familiarity with lessons learned activities. I've also known lots of projects that don't bother. I would say those projects are wrong, flat out wrong. You always have to do lessons learned. There's a lot of good meat there. But all of that still has to come with some sort of actions or behaviors or something that come from them. Otherwise, they don't impact anything. You have to do something. You have to learn something from the lesson. My interpretation of all of this is that the PM and the CM work together on a combined lessons learned evaluation and provide a combined document of results that includes findings for both technical and people-focused lessons because they may interact. So you combine them all into one document, but you definitely still address both parts, which is very much the strategy we've been following here, right? You want to ensure that everyone actually understands how those best practices click together and ideally You've been talking to Kendra, your sponsor, keeping her informed the whole time, and she can also help advocate as you go. The sponsor should be part of this lessons learned. They learn, they help, they need to support after the fact, right? And again, far off on the right here, it's pretty aligned. The approval is pretty straightforward. But on the change management side, it also includes just a little bit more detail around transferring of ownership for those operational pieces, the support responsibilities. That's called out much more in the change side. Doesn't mean you're not doing it on the project side. Again, it's just called out in the text a little differently. And the last item, release of resources, is a little bit more like the vision that we talked about in December. It's often not part of the project, but happens at like a higher leadership or capacity planning level. So if the project completes, the project manager and change manager deliver all of their completed documentation, lessons learned, blah, blah, blah. And then the resourcing or planning teams know those people are free and they take them away. What else do we have here? Let's see in the chat. Recommend PM and CM working together to provide a transition and sustainment plan. Absolutely. And that spans project value or the product through the people and sustainment process. Yes, 100%. This will look then very familiar, although I did keep them separate here and there's a reason. So our project may look like this in terms of the activities and timing. So the project stuff or the technical stuff is in blue. Change or people stuff is in red, and the joint activities are in purple. Specifically, I called out lessons learned and the action items and updates to best practices in purple because that's literally a joint activity. You're all in one meeting, you're working together. For example, the sign off and transfer, which is one from the second in from the right on both the upper and lower. You can see it both there. We want to talk about the things that you're doing might be a little bit different. So they can absolutely be joint, or it might end up being a little bit different depending on who's going to own it. So for example, the project manager owns transitioning new tools and processes to the team who's going to own it. That's the operationalize, whoever this was built for. Was it built for finance or HR or whoever? They own it. Meanwhile, the training, documentation, FAQs, should still be available to that team. Absolutely, but they may or may not, depending on the organization, own it. It may transfer to a learning and development team, which is why I wanted to keep those broken out, but 100% lockstep coordination, no matter what, every step of the way. So the project manager, the change manager have worked together. The project is done. Any questions? Okay. So we went to the moon. Yay, we went to the moon. We came back safe, yay. And we conducted all of our lessons learned in our closing activities. Absolutely. Now we celebrate, woohoo. I like the celebrate slide. I really like my clip art. There should have been music. I'm sorry, there's no music. Just feel the party inside. Today, we recapped all of our stuff. We recapped project management and organizational change management. We recapped the org models and how they work together. We recapped the process groups. We went through getting it done. We recapped some of those getting started activities, and then we planned and we executed and we monitored and controlled and we modified. Although that's not necessarily, again, in the text, definitely we modified. We made sure that our plans are up to date. We talked about that. And then we brought it all to a close as a team. So I did talk faster, but there's only 6 minutes left. That's okay. Any other questions? I think we've been answering questions throughout. If you have any, please feel free to connect. So feel free to reach out via email, LinkedIn, whatever. I am always available. And thank you, everybody, very much. And thank you to PMI Northeast Ohio for inviting me back. After whether it's Amir or Joe, whoever is going to wrap up, I am absolutely still available to hang out a little bit and talk through some templates or talk through any other questions. It doesn't look like we'll have time to review templates today, but I will either way, I will mail them out so that they get attached for you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I just want to share PDU claim. Let me just find it. Yeah, this is the claim PDU claim code. I'm sharing again. If any question, please put in the chat or open the mic and ask Julia. I'll leave it in the screen. And this is the other way to get PDUs. Attending our webinar or events will give PDUs. There's a few other ways, like podcast, PMI Center Stage podcast. And thank you all. Just back to the PDU and any question?
Yep, I'm happy to answer additional questions and hang out. And as I mentioned, I will attach a few specific actual templates for change management so that you will have that available to you. Not seeing any more questions, so I think that is an official handoff. Thank you so much, Amir.
Thank you everyone. And the presentation will be sent, will be emailed to after, I think, the weekend. Yeah, Joe verified that he emailed out this weekend. Thank you everyone.